is the review session for January 29th for the Trilogy UCSD Data Science and Visualization course. Tonight, I'm going to be discussing some of the concepts we've been going over in class, including Plotly and D3 functions. Unless anyone has any questions before we begin, might as well just dive into it. The code you should see on your screen right now should be pretty familiar to you. This is basically the same as, this is just activity 8 from Monday. And the goal of this activity was to produce this web page, which is a financial report powered by a website called Quandle. At least I assume that's how you pronounce it. And this is basically all front-end development. So how does this work? Well, we're going to use Plotly to generate the graphs. We're going to use D3 to perform our API requests, as well as populate this table. And that's basically the entire activity. So let's go ahead and, where should I begin here? Let's just collapse everything. And let's read through this the same way the JavaScript interpreter compiler will. So your compiler is going to start from the top of the file, and it's going to see API key, and it's going to create a new variable and set it equal to that string. We then define some functions. We then get down here to build plot. And here we're going to call the build plot function. So what does build plot do? Well, let's dig into it. You can see that here we define a URL template, and we go ahead and use, you've seen this a few times, but I don't think we've ever explicitly called it out to you. This is how you do string formatting in JavaScript. You use this special, it's like the back quote key. It'll be easier just to demonstrate this in HTML. Let's go here. Wrong button. So if I say var x equals back quote, or var x equals 6, and I can also say var y equals back quote, money sign, brackets x, and that should work. Y is now the string containing 6. This works effectively the same way string formatting did in Python. The only difference is that instead of using an F before the string to signify that it's a format string, you use the special character back quote, which can be found to the left of your 1 key on most keyboards. All right, back to the code. So we go ahead and create a URL, and here we are with D3, where we're going to tell D3 to go out and fetch data, fetch JSON data at that URL. And when D3 is done fetching that data, we want it to pass that data to this function that we define, this big long function. That's what this d3.json url.then construct does. This command is going to tell D3 to make a request at some URL, and calling .then and passing in some function is going to cause D3 to call your function, your provided function, and pass in the data that it received from the API. So logically, you can think of it as something like Yeah, I don't really have a good way of writing a function that's an equivalent. But that's all it does. It fetches data and passes that data to the function that you provide. This is how you can make API calls in JavaScript. Now, this API call has some pretty important properties. It's actually being executed in parallel to the rest of your code. So when JavaScript hits this line, it's basically going to start a new process, and it's going to go fetch the data in that process and then call your function on that data in that process as well. Everything else that's happening in your code after this is going to keep happening. And we're actually going to get this log statement before we get either of these. These won't execute, these log statements won't execute until D3 has gotten data back from the URL. This statement will execute almost immediately after D3 sends the request. Does that make sense? So if we go in here and we open console, note that I added these logging statements and they aren't part of your activity by default. Here we are already after the d3.json plot query call, but we haven't actually logged the data yet. That doesn't come until after, because that doesn't come until D3 successfully gets the data back, which takes, depending upon the API and how much data there is, some fraction of a second. Are there any questions on this concept right now?
Oh, Nolan? So
Yes.
yes, you're saying two processes are happening simultaneously? Like one
Correct.
is fetching the data, and
Yes.
then the other one reading the rest of the code?
So we have our main process, which is reading our code.
Okay.
Our process is going to start a second process when it hits this d3.json call.
Okay.
And that process is going to be where this function eventually gets called.
Okay.
And that's all going to happen in parallel to the rest of your code.
Okay. So the process of getting the data, it really depends on how big your API data, the one you're getting.
Yes, how long of a delay there is between when this line of code executes and when the function is actually called is going to be dependent on the quality of your internet service, the quality of the host that is hosting the API that you're making a request of, and how much data you're requesting.
Okay. So it's possible that your main process, will be waiting. Like
Your main process will not be waiting. It will keep going.
what if it's taking too long and it's done with whatever it's doing? I don't know.
So your main process does not wait for the URL for D3 to get data from the URL.
Okay.
It's going to keep going to the next line and the next line and keep going.
Okay. Okay.
Once it gets data back, it will call the provided function.
Okay, sounds good.
So like this is important. This is important for a lot of reasons, but just as an example, like consider if we define a variable sumTemp equals null. And inside here we said sumTemp equals data. Now you might naively think that if we access some temp variable down here after the d3.json call, then some temp will be equal to data, but it won't. Because some temp doesn't get set to be equal to data until we get the data back.
Okay.
Whereas this line will execute almost immediately after we start to go get the data. Here, I can demonstrate that. Refresh. Null.
Mm-hmm.
Here we define some temp, and then we print it. The fact that eventually our function is going to update the value is irrelevant.
Okay. 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 Thank you.
Any other questions on then and, or sorry, URL and or JSON and then? I am trying to fix something real quick. Wrong button. I don't know how this works. Francis, if you're permanently muted, I apologize. I'm not sure how to fix it.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, okay. You're good.
Okay.
I muted you on purpose, and I didn't know if it was permanent and if you could turn it off. Sorry.
Oh, you could permanently mute someone?
I am not certain. I can
Okay.
definitely mute any of you. I just don't know if you can unmute yourself. Apparently you can. All right. Anyway, back to the activity. So here we are. We define the URL and we go out and fetch data from it. And when we get the data back, we pass it to this function. And what's in that function? Well, we're going to log the data because I like to log things. I recommend that you guys pick up this habit of logging things. Just makes it a lot easier to see what's happening in your code. We are then going to extract some data from our returned data. So some specific names, some stock codes, some start dates and end dates, prices. And then we're going to do this other function call called get monthly data. So what does that do? We go up here. Here we are, get monthly data. This is going to start a new JSON query. We define our query URL, and we, just like before, we go out and do our fetch. When the data gets back, we eventually call this function. But while we're waiting, we move on and we go ahead and log this helpful print string just to demonstrate that these processes that D3 creates really are running in parallel. Your main process does not wait. So anything that you want to do that's dependent on the data returned by a query pretty much has to go inside of the function that you pass to it. That's the real key thing to understand there. So what does this do? Well, it's pretty straightforward. It's going to unpack some data and then call build table. And build table is a pretty familiar function. It's very similar to one that you guys have worked with in the past. It's just going to use D3 to build a table. And that gets us all the way back to the build plot function. We have successfully got the monthly data. Now we move on to trace one. And now we're getting into Plotly stuff. So Plotly is a JavaScript library that you guys have started to work with. And it's going to make it a lot easier to make plots. a lot easier than using raw D3, which you guys can do and will do next week, I think. But the important thing to understand with Plotly is that whenever you make a plot, you need to provide Plotly with the following information. You need to provide it with a key, which can be used to find some object in your HTML document, which will tell Plotly where to build your plot. So plot is here, and plot is here. So Plotly is going to build the plot inside of this div. You also need to provide Plotly with a data list. And data should be a list of traces. A trace is basically a dictionary, which Plotly knows how to parse and can extract data from for plotting purposes. It will usually have either X and Y coordinates or some number of named attributes. There are things like color that you can set. You can set the type, you can set the name. Depending upon what you're trying to do, there are a lot of different parameters that you can set inside of your traces. But ultimately, these are just normal JavaScript objects. They're normal dictionaries, and you just package them in a list to create data, and then pass your data to the new plot function. The final thing that Plotly demands of you is a layout parameter. The layout is basically going to tell Plotly things about how your graph should be styled and how your graph should be things like x-axis labels, potentially y-axis labels, whether or not the scaling that you should have on them, what your plot title should be, etc., etc. And there's a lot more than just the values we've shown you. I strongly recommend you guys look at the Plotly documentation. So here we got the monthly data, we built the table, and we got back here. Now we use the data that we parsed earlier to create some traces, package our traces in a list and name it data. We create a new object to hold our layout information, and then we just generate the plot. And that's the final thing that we do, and we're basically done. That's the entire application. And when we're all done, we get this nice little application which will let you report on Amazon. New plan. I don't like Amazon. We're going to do something else. Let's do Google. This will be more fun. Sweet, it worked. All right. But the HTML page hasn't been updated because a bunch of that is just raw data that somebody copied from somewhere. Oh well. So the final thing that I wanted to show you guys is actually in the build table function. And this is how we're using D3 to select objects. Here we're using D3 to find an object with an ID of summary table, I believe. Yeah, summary table. And I knew it was an ID because it's prepended with the number sign. This D3.select is going to return a specific D3 object, which makes it easy to interact with the pieces of your document. But it's not the underlying document object itself. You see, the underlying all of this D3 is code that was originally written to let people interact with the HTML documents. And you can access that by calling, I think it's document dots, whatever. I have the documentation open here. Yes, document class. And the document class is going to give you pretty much all of the tools that D3 makes available, but they're just a lot less easy to use. And as a result, I recommend that you stick to using D3 to do your selections and modifications. If you want to go through the documentation and learn how to use the document class, the document module, however you want to think about it, more power to you. The reason I brought this up is that this actually relates to the node method of D3 objects. So if I were to call, let's go ahead and remove this. I can log the table, but I can also log table.node. And some of you had questions about what is the node? The answer is that the node is the underlying document object that D3 is built on. So when D3 went out and fetched the summary table object, it returned it as a D3 object. If you want the underlying document object from the document class, then you can access it by saying your D3 object dot node. This can be very useful when you're working with libraries that weren't originally built to support D3 objects, but they probably were built to support document objects. As a result, so every document object has an append child method, but D3 objects do not. They just have an append method. So if I attempt to do table.node.append child, li, whatever, it's probably going to break it, but no big deal. This line of code will execute because we are getting back an actual document object from our D3 object that we are then calling append child on. And append child is a method of HTML document objects. Whereas if I were to directly try to invoke the append child method on the D3 object, this is going to raise an error because D3 doesn't have an append child method. It just has the append method, which is simpler and better in most ways and in subtle ways. For example, this doesn't actually work. In order to append a child with document objects, you actually have to first create a node. And I don't want to show you how to do that because it's a pain. But you would first have to say like li node equals document dot create node or something like that. And then you could append the li node. As opposed to in D3, you just do this. And it's a single line and it's nice and easy. And this is one of the many advantages of D3. It just makes it much easier to interact with your document. You can see option A versus option B. Does anyone have any questions about D3 select or D3 .node? Or I know I'm kind of brushing through this because I don't really want to teach you guys about the underlying document objects because they're not that important, and pretty much everything you can do with them you can do with D3 objects a lot easier. but I don't know. Questions, comments, concerns?
I don't know, maybe it's a silly question. Why are we using Node then in our code?
Why do we do what?
Oh, we're using Node, right? In our code, in our sample code application.
I'm not sure where you guys were using it.
Yeah, node dot value. What,
I think it's in the previous exercise. It's like the
Yeah.
same example, but the previous one has the node.
it's number 5. And I think it's in number 6 also.
Yeah,
So in
we're seeing that.
activity 7, you said?
The one I have open is 5. But I think it's also in 6. I don't know about 7. I didn't get there yet.
So here we're using it to access the underlying document object and then access the value attribute of that document object. And there really should be a way to do this without having to go through the intervening document object, but I'm not 100% sure if there is. So let's Google it. Okay, apparently you can access the property, and this should work in theory. Let's try it. First things first, let's get, is this just gonna work or do I need to update? I need to update my API key. And let's go ahead and open index. This is just me verifying that the current software works. It works, great. Now let's do this using a different method. All right, it worked. Oh, console, come on, sweet. So yeah, you can either access the value from that input by accessing the underlying document object and then getting the value, or just asking D3 directly to get you the value by accessing its properties.
Okay.
And in theory, this should work too. Let's go ahead and let's see if we can assign values. Kind of don't think you can. There's got to be a way to. Oh, yeah, okay. You do this. So if you want to set the value of some property, you access the D3 property method. You state the property name you're trying to access, and then you give it the value you would like to set it to. If you don't give it a value, then it will go ahead and return the value. And this should work. Looks good. Cleared it correctly. So yeah, you didn't have to use node. We did when we originally wrote this, but you do not have to. And you can do it using pure D3. Any other questions? Or all right, well, that's pretty much all of the review content that I have for you. At this point, it's open Q&A. So feel free to ask any questions you like related to pretty much anything.
Nolan, I have a question about the homework.
Sure, which one?
The one we just turned in yesterday.
Okay.
So in the bonus or the optional portion of it, it suggested that we could add the number of filters, more than one.
Yeah.
But then when you add a second filter in your code, in the JavaScript code, you'd have to use an if then else to filter either based on the date or based on the city or both, right?
That's one way you could do it, yes.
So my thinking was when you add 5, you have a lot more if then else statements coming up. So if not, and the code becomes really gritty. So what is the other way of doing it?
Sure, let's go ahead. All right. This should be the level 1 solution, which is presumably with just one filter. All right, 1-10-2010 filter. Cool. Undo filter. We're back. Sweet. So you have this working application, right? And you're curious, how do we add filters? Well, you're going to want to, there's a few general strategies that you could take here, but if you want to add filters to your, if you want to add filters, you're also going to need to add form labels. And you can do this dynamically in your JavaScript code, but because I'm lazy right now and just want to show you a simple example, I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this. And this is just, this should just add another form, another input form. What do we want to do? What do you guys want to filter on? Someone say something.
City.
Okay, enter a city. And do we have a placeholder? Roswell. Classic. I don't know if that's how you spell it. That's probably right. So now when I open this, or actually let's just refresh, hopefully I should have 2 forms. Great. Enter a date, enter a city. But this isn't going to do anything because I haven't attached any logic to it. So now we need to attach some logic to it. Go back here. Ignore this. This is a function that builds a table given some data. So here we are on the handle clip. And we attach this function to our filter button on click. And here we are going to select the date time, which is here. Let's go ahead and make this enter city, ID city, so that we can look it up. Or city equals b3.select city dot property value. And now we can go ahead and just temporarily create a new variable. Var filtered data equals table data, and then we can filter on our filtered data by just updating itself, and it'll be nice and easy to do. So here we do if date, then we can apply our filter function. We can basically just duplicate this logic. And we can say if city row dot, oh, what is it? City equals city. And just like that, everything's working still. And we have, they should both work independently. So let's say El Cajon now. Something's wrong. That is an issue. Why is that happening?
Is it because you don't have a logic for both being true, date and city?
I don't think so. Let's go ahead and refresh. Empty. City is empty, date is not empty, but the date is not working. Oh, weird.
I think we updated in 2018.
Oh, fair enough. 2010 that I meant. And now if we do El Cajon, it works. I guess I just didn't refresh.
Yep.
Oops. Because I didn't change anything in the code, right? Whatever. I didn't refresh. So you can see that you can keep going like this pretty much however many that you want. And that'll work just fine. You can actually go a little bit further though if you want to continue parameterizing this. Like you can say for form IDs, or var object IDs is date, time, and city. And then we can say var form IDs equals object IDs dot map x goes to number sign dot concat x. So basically, I'm taking each of these and adding a number sign to the beginning. And then I can say var form values equals form IDs dot map x goes to d3 dot select x dot property dot, or dot property of value. And now we don't really need most of this. We don't need those. We can just console.log form values just as a debugging statement. And now we can wrap this inside of a loop. So we can say for var I equals 0, I less than object IDs dot length I plus plus. If form values of I, then filter data is going to be equal to filter data dot filter. Row is going to go to row of object IDs of I equals form values of I. And now we don't need this. That's all gone. And assuming I didn't break anything, this should work still. 50-50 shot I broke something, but January 1st, 2010 works like a glove. El Cajon. Great. Let's try it with only a city. Still works. Excellent. And now that I've parameterized this really nicely and I can just easily add values, I can keep going and keep adding more forms very easily. Now what do you want to filter on? What should we do next?
I think it was state.
Sure, we can do state. What's a good state? Alaska.
It has to be abbreviation.
I'm sorry?
Oh, it has to be abbreviation. Like 2 letters.
I don't know any abbreviations other than California, so we're going to do California. That's not entirely true, but then we're going to have state, and we need to make sure ID is set. Now we add state here. Once again, we're going to be looking up the value here, continuing. And the only real point of concern here is that we should probably be making this comparison case insensitive. So let's look up how to do that. JavaScript string to uppercase. Apparently, it's a method called to uppercase. So let's use that. To uppercase. To uppercase. And now, regardless of how the data is stored and how the user inputs data, we're going to go ahead and ignore case, which should make it a lot easier for people, including myself. So now we've added a third property. And we can go back here, or here, wherever it was. Refresh. Hooray, now we have 3 filters. So we're going to filter by MO, whatever that is. State, MO. Let's look at 1-1-2010. Only one result. So your original question was how we could do it without having to do a bunch of if, then, else logic. And this is how. We keep iterating over the same set. We keep filtering on the same set of data. if we've been provided the input.
Could you explain why are we doing the hash sign concatenation?
Because I plan to use that string to look up the D3, to look up the object. And because this field is the ID field here, in order to look up an object by ID in D3, you have to prepend it with the number sign.
Oh, got it. Okay.
That's just so that we can find the object. I didn't really have to do it there. If you wanted to, you could maybe simplify this a little more by doing something like this. This isn't really simpler, but and remove this. And in theory, this still works. And it should make it more clear to you that we are we're just doing that concatenation so that we can look it up in D3.
Got it. Thank you, Nolan.
Any other questions?
Nolan, can you also add the HTML elements using JavaScript?
Probably.
For the filter, because if you look at the HTML, there are like 2 tags within the list tag, and then one of them has multiple attributes, and so I didn't know how to do that.
Well,
I know how to add one attribute.
so the first thing that we're going to need to do is be able to get the parent group. And that's a form object. So that's fine. So let's go ahead. Sure, I'll try to do this for you. There's a good chance I don't quite finish it, but so
Yeah, because there's too many tags.
let's go ahead. Since we want to generate these, let's go ahead and get our list of things that we want to generate outside of the function, because we're going to need to generate those filter forms before we do any clicking. We're going to have to do that. We're going to have to generate the filter forms outside the click function. So we're going to have to go ahead and start by grabbing the form. In order to make this easier on myself, I'm going to go ahead and add a unique ID. Totes a form. And now that we can just find that pretty easily. So
What does select all mean again versus just select?
select all is going to find everything. Select should be fine for this.
Oh, okay.
Go to the documentation if you have questions about the exact differences.
Okay.
Honestly, I'm not really sure beyond that very high level difference, which may be not important.
Okay, no problem.
So the next thing that we're going to need to do is go ahead and, for my sanity, I'm going to go ahead and collapse these so that I don't have to look at them and so I can see how this works. All right, so we're going to need to append a div.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to need an attribute of class and form group. And the next thing that we do, we're actually, let's back out of this because we actually need to iterate over the object IDs. Let's go ahead and call object IDs dot for each function field. Gonna go to there. So now we can go ahead and append another item. What do we have inside a form group? We have a UL object with a class and an ID. So let's go ahead and make a UL object, and let's go ahead and set its attributes. Class.
I think you only need UL once, don't you?
I'm only using it once, yeah.
Yeah, but if you put it in a loop, wouldn't it create multiple ULs?
Well, I'm creating, so this entire form group, I need to create one of those for each of my filters, right?
Oh. One
I have
form for
a UL here, but I also have a UL here.
Oh.
Can we not add everything in the same form group? Is there some convention for it?
Never mind.
Oh, we probably could. I was just copying and pasting.
Oh, okay.
Here. You're right. Let's go ahead and simplify this. So you're saying do something like this?
Yeah, just one UL and just put all the other filters as an LI, as a list element.
Seems reasonable.
Okay, then
That was
the parent tag would be UL class list group. I'm guessing.
Sure, why not? So now we are effectively only adding these objects to the list. So we can go ahead and look for a UL with class list group. Let's make sure that's unique. List group. All right, this is the only object with class list group. So we can go ahead and get our form list equals d3.select. It's a class, so we use dot list group. Sweet. And now we can go ahead and simplify this a lot by just saying form list dot append. What do we need to append? I think it's an li.
Yeah.
An li with class these things.
Mm-hmm.
And what goes inside of that? It's a label.
Right.
We're gonna go ahead and let's say var li item equals that. Label. For. Okay. Attribute class, or not class, we're setting a for attribute.
Mm-hmm.
And we're setting it equal to our field, looks like. And then we need to select the property value and set that equal to a format string in which we say enter a field. And then the next thing that we do is append to our li item
The input.
the
That's
input.
that's a difficult one because there's so many attributes.
I'm sure it'll be fine.
The attribute function are you able to pass in multiple arguments?
I'm not sure. I've only ever passed one at a time. I'd have to look it up.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste this. So we have class goes to form control. And then we have ID goes to our field. And then we have attribute goes to type, which goes to text. And then we have a placeholder item, which is going to be a bit tricky and require us to have more data than I currently have. So we're going to go ahead and, I'm sorry, was there a question?
Never mind. It doesn't matter.
You can add placeholders by adding another list of placeholder values that you'd have to maintain, but for now, I'm just going to try to do this without a placeholder.
Okay.
So this should build the form elements.
So you just keep appending the function? The append dot attribute dot attribute dot attribute. You just keep writing it?
Yeah, so the when there's a new line before a dot, remember that spacing is often not important in JavaScript. Immediately, if there's a dot at the beginning of a line, that's one case in which spacing won't matter. So this is the same as saying that.
Okay.
That. I'm just doing it on different lines to make it easier to see.
Okay.
Because I prefer my code to be on different lines.
Great. I think that answered my question. You just need to keep applying that same function.
Let's go ahead and remove all of these, and with any luck, this will work. Fingers crossed?
Yeah, you're crossed.
Yeah, it didn't work. All right.
It's okay. I got the logic.
Missing a parenthesis somewhere. Awesome. Does anyone see it?
It's in the second last line, attribute type text.
Thank you. Round 2. Hooray, we have our fields, but we're missing titles for some reason. Did I not set those?
Right? Did you define field?
I may not have.
Yeah. Because you.
For whatever reason, this isn't working.
Yeah,
I'm not sure why.
where is field defined?
Field is the input.
Oh, okay. Okay, so object IDs are there. Huh.
Well, let's see what this looks like.
If fill is the input, why would you use that as a display text?
Where is this stuff going? It's inside of a container named something. Inside of wrapper. And then inside of this, maybe? No. This? Yes. Maybe? Yeah. Filters. Totes a form.
Yeah.
Yeah, for whatever reason, it doesn't setting the properties correctly. So I'd have to look into how to do that. But let's see if it works anyway.
Should probably use keys ID as the text.
Alright, so we have date, time, city, and then state. So if I do 1-1-2010 filter, we get the dates. If I do a city, El Cajon, we get El Cajon. If I do a state, we get US, or sorry, US is a country. We need a state, California. Hooray!
Yay!
We are dynamically generating the filters.
Awesome.
Still
This is
bugs.
cool.
We could go further. What else do we want to filter on?
Shape.
Sure, shape. We add shape to our list. We refresh the page. We now have a fourth field, which should let us filter by shape.
There we go.
Very impressive.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure why this didn't work. I feel like it should have, but whatever. I don't have time to fix it.
Page. I shouldn't fill.
This review session's pretty much over. I don't know if anyone has any last minute questions.
I do have one, but we can talk about it later if you think the explanation is a long one. Basically, when you have Bootstrap and you have a separate CSS file, how do you know if one is conflicting with the other, and what's the best way to identify as well as fix it?
So when you have a, can you repeat that question? Sorry, I didn't quite catch it.
For example, for this homework, we had that table, and the Bootstrap had table striped, but for whatever reason, my table wasn't striped, and I couldn't really figure out why it wasn't behaving the way it was supposed to. So I
Did you
assumed that
make sure you included Bootstrap?
yes, there was Bootstrap, there was table striped in the class name. I tried a couple of different things with the table header as well, thread dark, thread light, something, but nothing seemed to work. So I kind of figured it might be something to do with the extra style sheet we had, the additional one, style.css, but I couldn't figure out how to identify if that was, overriding Bootstrap or Bootstrap was overriding that one.
You were generating the table in your code, right?
Yeah, the table was generated in the code.
Was your script above the Bootstrap link?
No, Bootstrap was in the head element.
I'm not entirely sure, and without seeing it, I don't think I could offer recommendations. In general, when you're trying to debug, whenever you're debugging, what you're really doing is discovering that something doesn't work the way you thought it did. And in order for you to debug it, you have to figure out how it really works.
I didn't understand that, but mean, I know it's how it's supposed to look.
You know how it's supposed to look, but one of the tools that you're using, you don't fully understand. That's what debugging is the process of learning how your tools work.
Okay.
And once you know how your tools work, you can figure out why the output you expected to get, you did not get. So for example, in this case, I expected this line to set the value of the label objects to enter a field. That didn't happen.
It would work.
My understanding of this property method is incorrect.
Yeah.
I
I'm
don't
guessing-
understand this. In order for me to debug this, I need to understand it. And
Okay.
that's the first step I would take.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes, it does.
Yeah.
I had another question. In the CSS file, in the style.css file, the
Sure.
TD element had multiple places where it was mentioned. So I'm assuming that it would pick up all the characteristics that were given for the TD element. What if one conflicted with another? What would it do? Would it take the first, for example, the background color was specified to be red in one place and the background color was specified to be green in another place for the same element? What
And it
would
was
it do?
both a TD class.
I mean, this is just an example. I don't have anything concrete, but if it was specified that way, the CSS pick up the first one?
You're asking me a question that I don't know the answer to. My intuition is that the last element, the
Okay.
last definition will take precedence.
Okay, all right.
But I'd have to check, and yeah, you should check. Find
Okay.
out. Get back to me. Make a
Alright.
post on Slack about it. That would be great.
All right. Thanks, Nolan.
Have a good night.
Yeah.
Everyone.
Thank you so much. That was a lot of coding. Have a
Thank
great night.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.